Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Video Essay Podcast, or what is really the first true episode of the Video Essay Podcast. And I say that because this show actually features an interview. That interview, as you probably already know by now, is with the one and only Kathryn Grant. Now, before I introduce Katie, I want to just say a few words. First, I want to extend a big thank you to all of you, to the folks who have subscribed to the show on SoundCloud, Spotify, or iTunes, to those of you who have followed us on Twitter or Facebook, and to the many, many of you who have tweeted or reached out to me with words of encouragement, with excitement for the show. I truly can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I am a one-man band here. Well, I shouldn't say that because there are tons of folks, including Katie, who have been spreading word about the podcast and who have been really instrumental in bouncing ideas off of. But it's really been such a joy to see the reaction online, and it has really fueled me and has really been affirmation in the best sort of way. So I really can't say thank you enough to all of you. Now, my plan for the podcast each week, before we get to the interview portion of the show, is I'd like to have some sort of monologue. And now I don't necessarily mean a monologue in the traditional sense, but I'd like to act as a sort of newscaster and broadcast updates from the world of video essays. What do I mean by this? Well, let's say you are editing a journal, or you are a programmer at a film festival, or you're looking to put together a panel at a conference or get spread word about a conference that is screening video essays, and you're looking to reach folks who are making this type of work and who are interested in viewing it. Please reach out to me, and I'm more than happy to share it on this podcast. As a video essay maker myself, I know that sometimes it is hard to go online and search for venues that will publish videographic work or share it or screen it. And so if you have those opportunities or you hear about them, please do send them my way. One of the goals of the website as the podcast progresses is to have a tab on the website that lists all of these opportunities and makes them super accessible. And that there are other folks who aggregate this kind of information, but why can't this podcast be another source as well? And now, before we get to our interview with Kathryn Grant, I just want to provide a little introduction to Katie and her work for those who may be unfamiliar. Katie is Professor of Digital Media and Screen Studies at Birkbeck, University of London. And in addition to being a prolific video essay maker and truly one of the best around today, who has made well over 200 video essays, when I think about Katie, I think of someone who truly, just as much as she is a maker, is a champion of videographic work. And what I mean by that is someone who is just as committed to sharing the work of others, to commenting on the work of others, to finding the work of others, as she is to making her own video essays. And I think that's really special, and why I wanted Katie to be the first guest of this podcast, because that, at the end of the day, is the goal of this podcast, is to share videographic work, to discuss it, to be passionate about it, and to really love it. And that is what Katie does. She runs the popular blog Film Studies for Free. She founded the group Audiovisualcy on Vimeo, which has curated, I believe, somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 video essays over the years, and is an absolutely invaluable resource for those of us who are looking for great videographic work. She co-founded and co-edits the journal In Transition, which is the first peer-reviewed academic journal of videographic work. Again, an invaluable resource. And she is also the co-author with Christian Keithley and Jason Mattel of The Videographic Essay, Criticism in Sound and Image, a book that the second edition of which was released last month by Caboose Books. And I got to know Katie because I was lucky enough to study at Middlebury College with Chris Keithley and Jason Mattel and work this past summer as the teaching assistant to their Scholarship in Sound and Image workshop, also known affectionately as Video Camp, which invites scholars from all around the world, really, to come to Middlebury for 2 weeks and learn the craft of videographic criticism. And Katie is one of the mentors of that workshop. So I got to spend a week with Katie in Vermont, and it was truly wonderful. And it was there that I pitched this podcast to her, and she eagerly agreed to be our first guest. In our conversation, we talk about how she first came to discover video essays, what inspired her to make one herself, and her entire philosophy when it comes to making video essays, why she prefers often to use text on screen instead of her own voice, how she uses music in her work, and whether or not only being able to use music in the public domain is limiting or empowering. And notably, in addition to many of her other video essays, we spend a good chunk of our time talking about her latest piece, The Haunting of the Headless Woman, which is one of the best video essays that you'll ever see, and it examines the relationship between the 1962 film Carnival of Souls and Lucrecia Martel's 2008 film The Headless Woman. And then after Katie and I dive in deep on that video essay, we talk about a video essay that Katie selected, which is Cotton, the Fabric of Genocide by Cydnii Harris, which again is one of the best video essays that I've ever seen. In the pilot, I read the description of it, and I'll read it for you again as a preview. The description on Vimeo reads, quote, "This is a video essay about slavery. Oops, I mean cotton." And that's all I will say for now because I don't want to spoil our conversation or the video essay, which you should go watch right now before you get to this part of the interview at thevideoessay.com. Thank you so much and enjoy the show. Now we come to the interview portion of our show where I am sitting down here with the one and only Catherine Grant. Katie, so great to have you on the show. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me. Well, it's great to speak to you.
And for being our first guest. This is very exciting. So I'd like to just begin very quickly in, one of the goals of this podcast is to sort of be an archive of the history of videographic criticism and kind of, hopefully, if you're a listener of this show, you'll be able to get a sense of where we are today in videographic criticism. And so I know you've given several interviews in the past about kind of how you came upon videographic film studies, and your story of discovering videographic film studies is kind of similar to how you discovered film studies in general. You're trained as a literature scholar and things like that. So I will link to those interviews on our website, but I would just like to, get a little bit of the brief history from you. Could you talk about when you first discovered video essays? Tell us that story.
I guess it was around 2006, 2007, and people like Kevin Lee, who was working as a film critic and film editor at the time, and Matt Zoller-Seitz and others were beginning to post videos that they were maybe embedding on their blogs. And I know for Kevin, it was something that he was doing in addition to written forms of film criticism and film studies as well. And I guess I just saw them. I was really interested in the emergent film culture online, especially by then. And I just thought it was amazing. Some of them, there were really quite a lot of variety even then in that kind of work. Sometimes it was just a glorified interview that might have had a little bit of film analysis added on. Sometimes it was full-on film analysis. Other times it was more like a documentary approach to the film, or something that you might find on a DVD, like an extra feature or something like that. So there was a lot of different stuff going on. But I just thought that combination of often voiceover and edited together film clips was producing things that I hadn't really seen on TV or in film documentaries before. That was much more flexible, much more personal in a way, and people didn't have to spend a lot of time thinking about it, so it could often be quite spontaneous. So I was really interested, and 10 years ago, to June of this year, was my anniversary of trying out making.
Wow.
Thank you very much. And I guess I'd kind of got myself equipped, technically equipped to be able to start experimenting by having a computer with an editing program, and began to play around with some things. And then I saw that there was a blogathon on the films of Claude Chabrol. And I thought, this is my chance. I can make a video essay for this blogathon, because I was really interested in Chabrol. And so my first video essay was on a film by him called, the film is called Les Bonnes Femmes, The Good Time Girls. And I made a video essay called Unsentimental Education. And it's kind of quite unlike video essays I've made since. It was 13 minutes long, so that's a little bit longer than I usually make. And it had voiceover. I usually choose not to use voiceover. And it's a little bit more like a documentary than other ones that I've made. But nonetheless, there were moments in making it that I was just so excited by. And I had such fun that right from the beginning, I could see it was such an enjoyable format for me to work in a way that maybe writing hadn't always been as enjoyable anyway. So I just took to it because of that. I hadn't, I just taught myself the editing that I needed to know. and just, kind of started experimenting there and then. And very soon my work moved away from that kind of format into maybe even more playful kinds of experiments. But yeah, it was because of the energy of the work that I was seeing online around 2006, 2007. So.
And so as you're discovering video essays, are you thinking about them as scholarship or as potential scholarship almost immediately? Or are you starting to play around? Because I think, in looking at your body of work, you have such a range where you have video essays that have been published in academic journals or video essays that are tributes to Aretha Franklin, for example, or Aretha Franklin and Victor Perkins, so there's a great, really, breadth to your body of work. And so, so could you speak a little bit to kind of those two poles?
I think the first video essays I saw, they certainly had some value as film studies, but they weren't primarily for that. They were absolutely about online film criticism and even really online blogging and online exchange between people who were interested in movies, quite cinephile. And my own work at the beginning couldn't help but be different because I was a scholar, I guess. So what changed was that I was a scholar who was allowing herself to play in public for the first time about my subject. As you said, I hadn't started out as a film scholar, I'd started out as a literature scholar. So film was definitely a subject that I entered into eventually as a scholar because I was really enthusiastic about it. I was a fan. And so maybe, in that sense, I was more open to play because it was on the subject of film. But I think it was the video format, the non-standard format of these things. When scholars work, they tend to work in particular formats. It's very predetermined. It's either an 8,000 word article or a 60 to 80,000 word book, or, these kinds of things are the way that we think about how we produce things. With video essays, there was no saying how long it was going to be. It could be 30 seconds, it could be 3 minutes, it could be 25 minutes. You had to kind of open possibilities that I think I was really drawn to. So from the beginning, my work was always very experimental. I wouldn't know what it would be like until I sat down and made it. And I wouldn't necessarily know whether I would choose to make a video essay about Victor Perkins' film theory or Aretha Franklin's work. So I allowed myself just to respond to the moment and kind of produce work as I felt at a particular time. So I operated a bit like a fan, but at the same time, always like a scholar.
Right. And that was one of my other questions was I sort of see you as kind of this public intellectual, if that makes sense, where you're kind of creating things for an academic audience, someone who might read an academic journal and someone who might go to rogerebert.com kind of religiously. Is that one of the potentials of videographic criticism? Is that one of its strengths in your mind, is being able to bridge communities to someone who maybe has written a book on a filmmaker or someone who's just seen one of their films and is really excited about it?
It definitely is, I think. I think it certainly was at the beginning of this, when the online video hosting sites allowed the exchange of videos like this. I'm sure that if you'd interviewed Kevin Lee back in 2007, he would have been quite surprised that film scholars were watching his work. But maybe he got over that surprise quite quickly because he made contact with lots of them, people like David Bordwell, Kristen Thompson. He made videos with some of those people. So, I mean, maybe he got an idea quite soon that there were those of us who were going to be interested in this form of communication. One of the things that really drew me to it was the possibility of that kind of crossover. And in a way, I guess I don't see myself as a public intellectual. I'm not especially embarrassed by that, but thank you very much. But on the other hand, I kind of think of public intellectuals as people who try to say considered things about matters of great import or import. But I think a lot of what I do with my work is not in that register at all. I try not to think about them in relation to an audience at the very first stirrings of making something. It comes from somewhere else. It comes from just a desire to make something rather than to say something. So I figure that public intellectuals are people who say things, and I'm definitely somebody who makes things. Some of them say things too, but most of them actually don't say very much. They just make something. They maybe make an experience for people of films that they haven't had before.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And that reminds me of something. So perhaps to give folks a little context here, you and I were just together a few weeks ago at the Scholarship in Sound and Image workshop at Middlebury College. And you gave a really interesting presentation about your work, and you used a phrase that has been stuck in my head since I heard you say it, and I think you know what I'm going to say. And that is, you used the phrase working in the flow to describe kind of the ethos of, I guess, of videographic criticism and making video essays. For our audience, could you talk a little bit about that concept? Because I loved it so much.
Good. Well, I think I'm glad it stuck in your head. I think it's probably a little bit different for me than for those people who are practicing this work as professional film critics, or even as scholars who are paid for each piece of work, which some people are. But I guess my working in the flow it refers to kind of online life. It refers to the way in which these videos occur to me and the way that I share them, and the way that there's often not very much of a time lapse between me making something and sharing it. I'll probably share it later in the same day I've made it, which is not how I often work as a scholar. So it's this kind of phrase that describes the responsiveness of this work. It's, sometimes I get commissioned to make something. Sometimes, as I'll maybe say a little bit about later, it takes me a long time to make some things. But actually, most of the things I make very quickly because they occur to me and I have a really keen interest in getting them made and out there. A classic example would be one you've already referred to, when someone I care about in media or in film studies has died. And I often go through the process of thinking about that person and memorializing them in some way in the very quick process of making a video that refers to their work in some way. So that's the flow. And I guess it's a different kind of model of publishing that is enabled by the online context.
In relation to this idea of working in the flow, one of the things that I think the reason the phrase stuck with me in my head was because I love the idea that with videographic work, we can go back and revise, we can go back and update. I just updated a video essay that I made in 2017 and it feels new, it feels fresh. Is that something that you do? And if you do go back and revise, who are you revising for? I guess, are you receiving feedback? Has someone said, I really like this and we want to show it at the BFI or at a film festival or something like that? Could you make a couple changes? Could you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I can. I mean, I think that is one of the advantages of this form, partly because so many publications that might be interested in publishing our work, they don't tend to upload the video to their own account. They tend to use your own account and embed the work from there. And that means, as we know, you can always change it.
Right.
At Vimeo at least, if not at YouTube, and other sharing websites are available too. So I don't tend to do that too much in the way that you just described about your own work, but I guess what I do see generally is that this work is iterative. So sometimes, you make something small and on its own it's not really much, but it's there, and then you add to it, you make another thing that's related to it, and it can be in quite an informal way, and you never knew you were going to make any of these things, but suddenly you end up with 5 or 6 studies of Brief Encounter and the way that Todd Haynes' film Carol interacts with the original material from Brief Encounter. That's the kind of thing that, I never planned to do that sort of thing, but it sort of happens. I've certainly changed things slightly, and I certainly get asked if people want to screen my work. Sometimes they want to screen one of the earlier videos, like I made a video called Rites of Passage when Joan Fontaine died. And it's just it's kind of a supercut, sort of, an intra-cut at least, of all of those scenes in Alfred Hitchcock's movie Rebecca, where the protagonist walks.
My favorite.
Exactly. She walks through doorways, and I just collected all of these scenes of her walking through doors or crossing thresholds, and that's all there is to it. And I published it a long time ago, and somebody wanted to maybe program that in a remix film festival, and wanted to have a copy that was in better quality, because this was a long time ago, and I couldn't do it again because I hadn't made it in that quality, and I couldn't just remake it. It was way too intricate a video for that. So on the one hand, it would be great if you could do that. I've certainly made better quality versions of videos later. It's different from writing in one sense. It does tend to encourage that kind of iterative work.
That's something that drives me crazy psychologically is I make an effort to get the best possible quality. If there's a Criterion Blu-ray, that's what I want it to work with, which is what I've worked with Rebecca. But it always drives me crazy where I think, what's even the point? I might as well get the cheaper DVD because there's going to be something that far surpasses the Criterion Blu-ray at some point. Anyway, it's one of those neurotic things.
Yeah.
And so I want to go back to something that you said earlier, and then we're going to transition to talking about your most recent video essay. And that is this concept of time. I'd say your sweet spot for time on a video essay, 4-5 minutes, maybe, would you say?
I would.
Talk a little bit about that. Is that deliberate? Is that a self-imposed limitation? Is there a philosophical reason that you do that? I'd love to hear.
Yeah. Well, I think from the beginning I've been aware of this question of length. And the way that I've often resolved that as a question in my own head, this kind of how long is a piece of string question about video essays, is that the work will be as long as it needs to be. And sometimes, as I said, I make something really, really short. Sometimes I can make something a lot longer. For me, in terms of online attention and myself, really, I think you can get a weight and detail into 5 minutes. That's harder in 3 minutes. It's too packed maybe in 3 minutes, but you certainly don't need 10 minutes for it, you know? A 10-minute detailed video essay is a different kind of experience to a 5-minute long one. So I don't know, I guess your observation is correct. There's something about the way that I make videos that makes that length work. Other people have different, different regular lengths. I mean, if I look around at the work of some of the video essayists I really like. Even though I don't always tend to make explanatory ones myself, some of the ones that I've made that I like most are in that mode. And I would say that Adrian Martin and Cristina Alvarez's study of Victor Erice's film Sur, South, which they made for Sight and Sound, is just an absolutely perfect piece of work. And that one I think is more than 10 minutes. I'd have to look and check exactly how long it is. But it's not, on the other hand, way too long. So between 10 and 15 minutes might be ones that I like to watch, but in terms of ones I make, I'm just drawn, I guess, to making ones that are generally shorter.
Perfect transition to talking about your absolutely stunning video essay, The Haunting of the Headless Woman. My first question is, I want to hear the origin story.
Yeah, mostly I just make video essays and press publish immediately and don't think about them too much and maybe reflect on them afterwards in writing or something. But with this one, this was a video, it has its origins anyway, in a video that I made back in 2011 for an event on the filmmaker Lucrecia Martel. And it was a symposium that looked back at that point 3 feature-length films that she'd made, which had culminated in what I still think is her greatest film, La Mujer Sin Cabeza, the 2008 movie, The Headless Woman. And she's a favorite filmmaker, quite straightforwardly, and I had organized this symposium, and I wanted myself to present work in an audio-visual format rather than a spoken or written format. So I set myself the task of making a video essay about this particular mystery in the movie that had genuinely interested me and something that Martel had said about it in an interview. And the video essay, I think, was always kind of interesting. It always had a really powerful argument, but I was kind of aiming towards making a sort of 20-25 minute long work. And that was quite ambitious for somebody who'd only been making videos for 2 years in a very self-taught fashion. That was certainly the longest one I had made to that point. And I think I just kind of slightly ran out of time, slightly ran out of steam. But I presented the work as it stood then at the symposium, and people kind of quite liked it. It didn't completely have a conclusion. It said some interesting stuff, but I know that I was kind of modeling the work on an academic essay or an academic paper with a whole big exposition section, background, theory, lots of reference to other movies in the particular subgenre that I talk about in the video. And anyway, so it went a long way around the houses to get to a critical point. But I knew that it wasn't the right form for an online video essay and that I needed to work harder on that. And I did get some feedback with this one. People watched it. I made Kevin Lee watch it at one point, and his reaction definitely prompted me to go back to the basics with it and rethink the form. Anyway, so I started remaking it about 2 years ago, and I knew I just needed to completely start again. And I don't know, just the different things happened that made it possible to find the form that it's in now. And one of them was finding a piece of music. I tend to work often, if not always, by using copyright-free music from the internet. And I found this great piece of music on freemusicarchive.org that provided me with a kind of sense of duration, piece of music that lasted about 4 minutes. And it gave me a sense of energy and drive. And I just started editing to this piece of music. So that was the first kind of help that I had. And then the second piece of help was listening to a talk by Mark Rappaport, the artist and filmmaker. And he was talking about having learned to use Final Cut Pro recently and how it was great for him because in that video editing software, which I use, he had been able to find a way of doing collage techniques that mimicked how he worked as a photomontagist. So he's a filmmaker, but also somebody who made photomontages. And I was just so inspired by the aesthetic of these films that he'd made that I realized I just needed to learn how to use that technique. So I think suddenly realizing that I could use collage as a comparative technique, which is what the video does, opened up the second kind of locked door, if you like, to finding the right form. And then it was just a question of time. It took me a little while to put it all together, because it's actually quite a complex visual editing piece of work, really probably the most complex I've done. But I knew I wanted it to be explanatory as well. So the visual mix tells the viewer quite a lot, but I wanted to find words that would also reflect what they were seeing, maybe kind of build upon what they were seeing and build an academic argument. But I still didn't have a conclusion. So I made a 3-minute cut that was like a trailer for the film that I showed quite a lot. And then gradually I just kept adding little bits and pieces, little seconds and minutes, 2 more minutes in total, until I got to the final section. I needed the final scene, and I knew I had to use the final scene of both movies, but I didn't know how at that point. And I just, again, through working in this collage form and listening to the music and editing to the music, which I had to extend a little bit, I just found the right form, and that gave me the couple of last sentences of the captions that I use. And it was that kind of eureka moment, which I don't always feel with my work at all. And I really experienced with this video, which you can imagine after so long was quite a joyous thing as well. So it was a feeling of satisfaction, which really doesn't happen that often in life. And I just found the right words to articulate what I think turned out to be a pretty powerful critical argument and scholarly argument. So that's the story of the making of that video. Just how long was that in total? 8 years.
Wow. And so during that period of creation, you're obviously making other video essays, so I don't want to folks think that you were waking up every morning for 8 years and working on that. Obviously your love for the filmmaker kept you going and your interest in the subject, but talk a little bit about, for people who maybe are in between projects right now and want to get it done, talk about that process. Are you always thinking about it? When was the longest chunk of time, if you can remember, where you weren't working on it and thinking about it? Because I think that's important.
Yeah, I think in between 2011 and 2017, I thought about it a lot, but I didn't work on it at all.
Right.
So I went back to the drawing board with it in around 2017, and so for the last 2 years, I've been thinking about it intensively. Despite the fact that I've made dozens of other videos, I've made probably over 200 videos in the 10 years, and in the last couple of years, a lot of those have been made. So I'm certainly not thinking about it all the time, but what I am doing all of that time is experimenting with form. So one of the things that was characteristic of the form the first time around, the 25-minute long version or attempt, was it was a sequential comparison. One scene from one movie, one scene from the other movie, one scene from one movie and other movies. This time I chose what is a kind of collage technique, but is based on a split screen idea of superimposition and mixing. And that came about because I have been working a lot with split screens in the last 10 years. And
Right.
Split screen comparisons, I guess, have been where I've done a lot of my experimental work in this form. So it's kind of gradually come to me that not only would a split screen or simultaneous comparison work best for this work, but that also going beyond that to a complete aesthetic of mixing and moving around images to try and create a phrase I use a lot, a new spatial montage that will make a lot of the argument for me in a really concise way. So I know that for me, this video essay is an original contribution because of the argument that it makes about the Headless Woman and the film that Martel uses to generate some of her story, I think. But it also is an original piece of work because of the way that it manages to tell a film story, which is this quite ambitious for a 5-minute long video, movement of scenes from the two movies over and under one another. Mm-hmm. That's really quite choreographed. So that's the other thing I think it's an experiment in.
And I want to dive into that. And so for those who have not seen the video essay, which shame on you, if you didn't do your homework, go watch it now. We're not going to talk, I don't want to spoil it, but essentially what it is it's a comparison between Martel's The Headless Woman and the 1962 film Carnival of Souls. And it's looking at the two female protagonists and comparing Mary from the Carnival of Souls to Veronica in The Headless Woman. And basically the argument that Katie makes quite brilliantly is that, she talks about how Martel has talked, but there's sort of kinship between these two films and sort of how can the Carnival of Souls be used to better understand Veronica as a character. Would that be an accurate summary, Katie?
Yeah, exactly. Veronica as a character and the movie plot as a whole, I guess, as well. Yeah.
Yes.
Why does the story, what is the relationship between these two stories and how does Martel use one to help us understand the other one?
what I want to do is dig into the formal elements of the essay as you talk about. You, as you say, in using spatial montage and a different type of split screen, instead of having two boxes right next to each other, what Katie does in the essay is you'll kind of have the headless woman as kind of the main text on screen, and then the Carnival of Souls will almost fade in beside it, which is incredibly effective because it has this ghost-like quality, which I'm sure was deliberate. And so how did you do that? Was that by adjusting the opacity and kind of having it fade in? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's one of the elements indeed. So
yeah.
One of the things when I was moving around with it that I realized is that I could use the aspect ratio of the two movies. So the video opens with Carnival of Souls scenes, and it's got a kind of a classic 4:3 aspect ratio, and then it flips to a scene from The Headless Woman, and it's a very famous scene from the beginning of the movie, which is pretty characteristic of a lot of Martel's mise-en-scène in the whole film, where she has the character on one side, one extreme side of the screen, with a space on the other side. Now there's stuff in the space, obviously, but in another sense, there's usually not characters. It's usually empty of other people. And I just started thinking about how it would be great to see the Headless Woman haunting this movie in the way that I felt it actually was. So it's like a kind of materialization of the way that I felt Carnival of Souls haunts the Headless Woman. And so that was the idea. And then, as I said, watching Mark Rappaport speak about a similar kind of aesthetic, he mentioned a few words like vignetting and using matte effects and so on. So what I did was I did a work of superimposition and a work of reducing down the size of the frame of Carnival of Souls, and sometimes increasing it, and then cropping the edges, so that what you're seeing are the top and bottom of the frame from the Headless Woman, with Carnival of Souls kind of appearing through superimposition, fading, opacity, and vignetting. And although it looks like it's all the same, it's actually quite difficult because it isn't all the same. And as I kind of moved on through the video, because it was literally made bit by bit by bit, I realized that I didn't have to stick to the aesthetic that I adopt very near the beginning of one on one side and the other on the other side all the time. And I start becoming more experimental with where Carnival of Souls appears. And I had a great fun with the final sequence because it's kind of all over the place in order to tell a story about what's going on and really bringing the two characters together.
I really want to dig into the sound and the music in particular. I also want to relate this back to something that you said earlier in the interview, which is that you do not use your own voice often in video essays. And so this video essay features text on screen, which features your own original analysis. It features a quote from Lucretia Martel. It quotes another scholar who has...
Quotes Aviva Briefel in her article, yeah.
Yes. And so I'd just be interested to hear you talk a little bit about why you chose text on screen, and more generally, why do you not like to use your own voice?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's not that I don't like to use my own voice, I could put it like that, but I guess it's a preference really for forms that allow the sound of the movie or the sound that I'm choosing other than my voice to convey the argument. So from very early on, I've enjoyed using captions. And I think when I started this video, I wanted it to be explanatory, but I also wanted it to be a little bit like another video that I've made that I think is also explanatory and poetic at the same time. And that's the video I made on Andrea Arnold's film Fish Tank, a video called Uncontained. And that video uses a lot less text, but it still uses me asking questions about the movie. And me asking questions about the movie in caption form is what I do in this latest video as well. So I think it's a great technique for students and for people starting out with videos, is rather than writing an essay and trying to put that essay as captions onto a video, is to try and kind of come up with little questions as short as possible that you can kind of help interact with you in the video editing space, but also the viewer. It draws the viewer in. This video, although it uses music, the sound mix is actually incredibly important. There's quite a lot of sound from the two movies in the video, and I've moved quite a lot of the sound around. The sound from Headless Woman is almost always synced to the images that you're seeing, but the Carnival of Souls sounds come all the way through, and I use it to make things extra scary or extra spooky at various moments, to unsettle the viewer in hopefully quite subtle ways. So as it happens, whenever I make a video with captions, not everybody likes that aesthetic, and people who find reading on screen particularly don't like it. So I've always had that kind of feedback since I've been making videos, that some people just don't like reading. I get that. So I have always contemplated making other versions that those people could possibly enjoy more. So I did make a voiceover version of this video, which I probably am not going to publish because in order to make it work properly, I'd need to alter the sound mix.
Right.
Kind of underlying sound mix, and I don't want to do that. For me, I've done it, and I kind of think, oh, okay, maybe some people would prefer this, but for me, it just doesn't work as well as the caption version. So I always hope that if people find it difficult to read at any point, that they should think of online videos as this object that we can always return to, and press play on or pause. You know, it's not like the movies where you're being projected this experience you can't move away from. In video essays and YouTube videos or video videos generally, we can interact with them. So hopefully people can slow it down.
And to be clear, I do not think that it needs a voiceover. I think the text on screen is perfect. I am someone who prefers text on screen. I'll identify myself as a text on screen person for those looking. And also going to your point, you also have your video essay skipping rope, which it basically identifies all the hidden cuts in Alfred Hitchcock's Rope. And then you made a second video essay that was sort of an editor's commentary on the video essay. So I think, again, a really good example of using voiceover in a different way on a different video essay, working in the flow, all the topics of our conversation.
There's another reason why I really, really was committed to using captions for this video, and that's because I always wanted it to be a bilingual experience. And that's much easier to do with captions, because as soon as you put someone's very nationally situated voiceover over something, then it kind of introduces all sorts of meanings, and I didn't want those. So the kind of clarity of text was great for me. And it also meant that I always wanted to make a Spanish language version. And in fact, the version that just got published is actually the version with integrated Spanish captions at the Audiovisual Essay journal TecMerin, a Spanish journal. And I produced closed caption subtitles in English. So anybody wanting to watch that video at that website can see the English language translation. But I've also got the original, if you like, version that I made with English language integrated captions. And so I just like that flexibility. I'm thinking of producing other language versions of it as well. So if anybody wants to help out with translating the video into other languages, that would be great. With voiceover, that's harder to do. It sort of situates work in a way that I don't want my work to be situated. I'd rather it sort of was a little bit more neutral in that voiceover voice that comes across.
Absolutely. And going back, and I really want to keep talking about the text here, and specifically a phrase that you use. As you're making your argument, you use the phrase, which I love, that this comparison raises, quote, an intriguing ghost of possibility. And of course you have the use of ghost there, which fits into the whole theme, but I think that phrase really gets to one of the most exciting things about videographic criticism, is that you are able to pose questions that maybe you answer, maybe you don't, maybe you leave more questions. And that's very, that's, as a scholar, that's what you are trained not to do, I think.
Exactly. Yeah.
So speak a little bit to that phrase and kind of the ethos of the essay in that regard.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because on the one hand, the video does make a very definite argument. It posits something I do believe in. The argument that I convey is the argument I've come to, the argument that I have arrived at after a lot of thinking and playing with the footage and so on. But on the other hand, I don't know if that was the the motivation behind this instance of intertextuality that Martel uses. I haven't interviewed her about it. I don't intend to. I kind of like leaving it open. So those kinds of lines of dialogue are partly about playing with the theme of the video and the kind of ambience of the video as well, which is hopefully a little bit spooky, but is also about suggesting that I'm only making a possible argument. What I'm doing is trying to construct something that's arguable, but not definite. It's not provable. But I think, as I've argued before about split screen videos in particular, they're ways of convincing us about the relevance of declarations of influence. is much more persuasive than written forms. The fact that I can show you exactly how similar, but also the divergences between these two movies, I think is much more powerful way of making an argument. So even though I might be kind of tentative in my language in a way that, as you say, scholars are usually encouraged out of, I still think that mixture of the tentative argument and the powerful visuals is a compelling way of putting forward an argument.
Often when I'm watching your video essays, I find myself having to look up a word that you use in your on-screen captions. I think, what is that? For example, the word I had to look up in Haunting Festival was a word I might even mispronounce, so you'll have to help me. It's palimpsestuous?
Almost. Yeah, palimpsestuous. Yeah.
Palimpsestuous.
Yeah. And people who have heard that word like that word in the video. So I know I like putting it there too.
It's the exact right word. I'll define it. It's a parchment or other writing surface on which the original text has been effaced or partially erased and then overwritten by another.
Yeah.
And so
exactly.
Do you just have a much superior vocabulary to me? Or when you're making these essays, are you spending time looking for the precise word to use? Because I noticed that in a lot of your work.
Yeah, palimpsestuous. First of all, it's a neologism. It's a neologism. So it's a word that I coined based on an adjective, which is palimpsest or palimpsestic, I think people say. So if you like, the straight word to describe this form of finding another text underneath a later one, or a piece of a painting underneath a later painting. It's a very well-known concept, and it's one I'm really interested in working with. And in my own work on intertextuality, it comes from the title of a book by Gérard Genette called Palimpsests in the original French. So there's a lot of scholarship going on there. This is something I've been writing about for a long time. But with The Headless Woman, I'm definitely referring to Martel's idea of the weird sibling relationship going on between these two movie protagonists separated by decades. And I'm kind of playful with that notion. So I am interested in this notion of incestuousness. There's incest hinted at in The Headless Woman as a movie. It's actually a transgenerational example. It's kind of very weird. So I'm sort of playing with that with this language as well. But I am definitely seeing this work again as making a contribution to knowledge about how movie texts refer to one another and what is the audio-visual form of the palimpsest. So in order to explore that, I've kind of created this palimpsestuous aesthetic, and it felt like the right word to use to describe it. But again, quite a playful word, I think.
And I think that makes total sense. And it's such a beautiful word. It was so fun to go look it up. But I think it also speaks to really the different types of videographic criticism, because I'm also a journalist. And I think journalism is, not quite what, someone like Matt Zoller-Seitz is doing when he makes a video essay, but they're similar in that they're meant for the public, for a wider readership. And I'm imagining bringing that word to my editor, they'd say, what's going on here? But as you say, it's essential to contributing to scholarship and to knowledge. And also, if that's something that you want to continue working with, that is an absolutely essential component. Yeah.
But also, I kind of do aspire to having a wider audience than that. I don't want to just communicate to a tiny field of people who might who might understand that word straight away. So.
Yeah, and that word doesn't limit. Yeah. That word does not. Sorry, I'm getting excited here. That word does not limit the scope of the video, even slightly. It's just, it adds another layer of meaning, which I think is sort of the art of the video essay, right? Is, how many different types of audiences can this reveal to based on what knowledge and interests they bring to the video. I want to talk a little bit, go back to sound. And you already touched upon this, but one of the questions I was going to ask you was, when do you decide the music? Because I can imagine if you decide it too late, it can be painstaking.
So the music for me provides a sonic canvas for a video. Clearly, it provides you with a sense of rhythm, beats, and so on, a sense of mood. I love this music because it was kind of both acoustic, but also quite driven, and there's quite a lot of variation in it, which is great for editing too, because you can kind of add, and it just worked, it just worked really well as a kind of inspiration for me I knew which frame I needed to add next because of how the music was going to go. So for me, it's very important. Yeah, with other ones, I find the music a bit later in the process, but it'll still have some determining effect on things like the length, and maybe I'll go back and re-edit a bit. But I've written a bit about the use of music in my videos in an article about the video that I made called Carnal Locomotive. And I use a completely crazy piece of music in that video. It's like sort of drum and bass, maybe a bit of reggae. It's really, really weird. And it was completely inspiring hearing this piece of music and putting it to the film footage that I put it to. And in the article that I wrote, reflecting on the making of that video, I talk about this notion of rhythmic perception. Mm-hmm. And it's to do with how we get taken through quite complex forms of thinking and experiencing with music, especially in online video. And there's something about the way that we can kind of be instructed in a bodily way that is definitely going on with the Headless Woman video, even though it maybe doesn't feel like it. And it's to do with the kind of acoustic elements, to do with the particular rhythm and the way that it varies. It's hard to describe, but if you start watching videos in that spirit that have music, or music videos even, music videos also use rhythmic perception to tell a story frequently. So I'm kind of very interested in that. And I know that I don't play an instrument to any high level, but with the ability to edit using copyright-free music, you kind of the freedom that gives you. I know I've been able to kind of act out some kind of deep musicianship that stopped me having to train for years. But I know it's a very creative part of what I and other people who use this method do.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I think folks who speak in making video essays will find is that limitations are actually empowering and really help. And anyone who's gone through the Scholarship in Sound and Image workshop or read the new version of the Videographic Essay, which is a book by you and Chris Keithley and Jason Mattel, will know that limitations, especially self-imposed ones, can be really empowering, and I think are essential to A, getting work done, and also B, really lead to exciting discoveries. And so it seems like you are constantly kind of on the lookout for music that you could be using.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And Jason and Chris talk about them as parameters and parameter-based filmmaking. And I'm definitely interested in that notion of constraints. And in a way, the reason why the Headless Woman video didn't get finished in 2011 when I started it was because I didn't have the constraints or the parameters that would work for me. My vague one was the 20-minute, 25-minute conference paper. And that was just too long-winded. But by making myself make something that was 4 to 5 minutes long, I kind of meant that I really had to engage with the notion of concise communication and interesting, engaging communication as well. And so that determined a lot of the choices that I made. It narrowed the field, but it also meant I had to come up with creative solutions. And so the collage technique was definitely one of the creative solutions that came up that way.
We still want to talk about the video essay that you've selected for us to talk about by another maker. But before we do, I just want to talk about you talked about that this video essay has been published in an academic journal. It is also now available on your new website, which is screenstudies.video. So could you talk a little bit about what screenstudies.video is? And could you also talk about maybe any future plans that you have for the video essay?
Sure, thank you. Well, screenstudies.video is kind of like a book of video essays, if you like, an online web experience of the videos that I've made in the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. And I've done that because in the UK we have this academic requirement that we have to have our research audited by the government every 6 or 7 years. And so in the exercise of this 6 or 7 years ago, I had a few video essays that were published that were entered for this exercise. This time, because I've made so many more, I wanted to enter them as a website project. And it would collect all of the videos, or many of the videos, and all of the writing that I have published about them, all in one place, but kind of organized like a film studies book that showed how audiovisual methods like these can add to the kinds of insights in the established fields of film studies and film and screen studies specifically, but also maybe enable us to tackle some new things like fan studies and so on. So it's kind of like an introduction to my work in the context of the discipline of film and television studies. And I'm putting it together, and I thought I would begin by publishing this latest video, which I do think is one of my best. Don't always feel quite so equivocally proud of my work, but because this one was such a struggle, it's one that I'm very happy to have as sort of representative of my work at the front of the website.
And so when can we, I believe the website says that it'll be finished, You'll be working on it for the rest of this year, and it will be live in 2020?
Yeah, the idea is that I will publish it bit by bit, but certainly the final bits of it have to be out in 2020. So they have to be out by, I think, the end of the year, but I will try and publish as much as possible by the beginning of 2020.
Wonderful. Well, that's screenstudies.video, and of course, that will be linked to on our website, thevideoessay.com. So now let us transition to talking about the video essay by, this is a feature of this podcast that I'm very excited about, because I think it's where we get to really find some work that maybe folks have not seen before. And I asked you to select a video essay, did just a stunning essay called Caught in the Fabric of Genocide by Cydnii Harris. And again, that's on our website, so please go watch it beforehand. Trust me, you do not want to miss it. And so could you tell us a little bit about why you selected this video essay, and also how you found it?
Yeah, if I begin maybe with how I found it, because as well as making them and watching loads just generally, I've also been really interested in trying to collect and link to and share lots of video essays over the years. So on Vimeo, I began a group back in 2011 called Audio Visual C, which is really just a way of collecting videos that I came across at that platform that seemed to me to be videographic criticism in the field of film and screen studies. And I got joined by lots of people who helped me curate that now. So there's about 70 of us, and we've curated, I think it's under 2,000 videos, but still there's plenty to watch there. So if you find that link, you'll be able to see we get new videos added every day. So I kind of watch videos at Vimeo that I've tagged video essay, and I get those to my feed, and I get other ones, audiovisual essay, and then I follow lots of people at Vimeo who I know are making these things, and then other people submit them to the group for us to approve. We approve pretty much everything apart from kind of commercial work or irrelevant work, but anything, we don't have a quality indicator. We actually publish anything, or we group together anything that we think is a video essay in this remix form. But I also get sent lots of links by teachers whose students have been making video essays. And I don't get to watch all of them because it can be quite onerous at any particular point. So if the teacher makes a really good case for why I should see a particular video, I will always watch it. And this is what happened with this video. So I was really grateful to Tracy Cox Stanton, who's a professor at the Savannah College of Art and Design in Georgia, who's also a friend of mine as it happens. And she wouldn't just send me anything. She would only send me good stuff. So she sent me a couple of videos by Cydnii Harris, who was this is where my lack of American vocabulary will betray me, but a final year undergraduate student in her college. She made another great one about Get Out as well, which I also loved. So if you find this one, you'll be able to find her account. But I just thought this was a stunning piece of work. In one sense, it is a study. It is a study of how cotton appears in kind of movies generally, but particular kinds of American movies. But it's also far more than a study. It's a performance of an exploration of the what's at stake in cotton as a figure in cinema, in documentary cinema, but also in fiction cinema, from movies from, I don't know, the 30s, 40s, and 50s up to, and earlier, because Birth of a Nation, of course, is earlier, up to very recent movies like 12 Years a Slave and so on. So it's just a really great, politically motivated, but not in a really heavy way. You just don't, you get a sense of a point of view. And it's very hard to disagree with this point of view as well. Yes. But you also get a sense of great authorship, great invention, a way of taking you through stuff. And I don't know what her constraints were, but I think one of them was time. So she did, I think, set out to make a pretty short video essay, and it's 4 minutes and 10 seconds long. So it's really easy to watch, and it's very, very arresting in its style. But she uses a voiceover from a kind of documentary film that might have accompanied feature movie in a cinema screening. I don't exactly know where this film comes from. I do know it's made by Fred Zinnemann, who of course is a really famous.
Oh, really?
So yeah, so uses some images, but also the voiceover from that film to accompany a collage, but a sequential collage of excerpts from movies that also have cotton in them.
Right. So it begins with, the film is called The Old South.
That's it.
And it's a short film that was released in 1938, so a year before Gone with the Wind. And that's sort of how she begins the video essay.
It. Yeah, that's the context.
Yeah, and then it kind of builds and builds and builds. And should we spoil the
I'm kind of reluctant to spoil it because I think I do hope people watch it first. I mean, because I think it's an experience. But maybe now we've given a big spoiler warning. You can say what you're going to say.
Yeah. So spoiler warning. So pause. Go watch. Basically, the way that this video essay builds up to is it ends with the voiceover narration talking about basically the Old South is talking about that the reason the South fought the Civil War was for cotton and not for slavery. And this was a film that was produced by MGM a year before The Gone with the Wind. And basically, Cydnei's basically obviously saying, yeah, that's complete bullshit, And so basically the payoff is by the end, the essay ends with the narrator saying, and whatever, the South or whatever will be gone with the wind. And then it cuts and it ends. And the essay is marvelously edited. It's flawless. And one of the things that I was thinking about as I watched it was there has been a good amount of videographic work about Gone with the Wind.
Yeah.
Which I would be interested to know what you think about that, because it's kind of surprising to me but it's also very not surprising because I think that movie matters a lot less to our culture now than it did at the time.
Oh yeah.
But for many reasons that vary from length to racism and sexism. But I think it's one of the things I like about this essay is it says no, but you may not be thinking about Gone with the Wind, but it's really, really important. Yeah. And you need to start thinking about it in the impact that had.
Yeah. And you may not be thinking about Birth of a Nation, and it may be a very troubling film and one that even teachers find difficult to show students, but it is a film you absolutely need to know about, because the way that you're going to understand contemporary racism and contemporary white supremacy is by understanding these earlier films and texts. And that's what's so powerful about the direction that her video essay takes. It comes as a surprise, and when you watch it for the first time, you kind of, I mean, the audacity of this video is great. It's so purposeful and so effective, but it just takes you where it wants to take you. It intervenes in the images. It uses manipulative forms of techniques really brilliantly, not to manipulate you, but to expose the images for what they are, but also the voice of the critic is there in her editing. So it's such a powerful piece of work, and I would say it's perfect. I can't think of, if I were her teacher, I couldn't have thought of anything I would say to her to improve this piece of work. It's just a really great piece of work to watch.
I totally agree. And one of the things that really stuck out to me about this video essay was its tone and how it balances the incredibly serious subject matter, and it makes a very political argument that's incredibly important and that hits you hard as a viewer. But it's also lighthearted and funny and
it's hilariously funny
and playful, and so it creates this mix of emotions that kind of go through as you watch it, because you're thinking to myself, what do I think, what's going on, and all of this is packed into 4 minutes, and by the end you're just kind of, whoa. I think I had to watch it after you sent it to me. I think I watched it 3 or 4 times just trying to get it. And as you say, it takes us through A Birth of a Nation up to 12 Years a Slave, Django Unchained, etc. And so the breadth of it is really great. I think there are a lot of video essays that try to deal with that number of films. And again, talking about limitation, we don't know what the limitation was, but I think a limitation would say, a teacher might say, okay, limit yourself to 5 films, limit yourself to 6. And not only does she use films, but she uses television commercials at the end that talk about cotton, which, man, incredibly effective, and incredibly effective coming where it does in the piece. I do believe it builds chronologically.
It does.
But then I'm hit with the images of a department store and a television commercial and things that are speaking to me and consumerism and the role I play as a consumer. And at that point, that was wow. Then it really began to hit. And then she hits you over the top with the Gone with the Wind, and it's like, boom, whoa.
Yeah. No, it's a great piece of work. And I think she, I know I had a little email contact with her. I know she was pretty proud of this piece of work as well. And I think she hoped she would go on and make some more video essays. And I really, really hope she does. Cydnii, if you're out there, you have to make more of this.
Please. Absolutely. And we'll link to her Vimeo page into this video as well. Thank you so much, Katie. Really appreciate you being on today.
Thanks, Will.
thank you again to Catherine Grant for a truly wonderful conversation and for being the first ever guest on the Video Essay Podcast. Yay! Thank you so much, Katie. I truly, truly appreciate you taking the time and for all that you do for the video essay community and that you've done for me. I really can't thank you enough. And now we come to the moment that you've all been waiting for. Your homework for episode 3 of the Video Essay Podcast, which will debut on Thursday, August 15th, 2 weeks from now. My plan right now, again, I said in the pilot, you have to go easy with me because pretty soon I'm going to be a graduate student and I assume I'm going to be pretty damn busy. But the plan now is to have this podcast be released every 2 weeks, so twice a month. And I could not be more thrilled to share with you all that our guest will be Philip Brubaker. Now, many of you will know Philip as one of the most prolific video essayists currently working online today. I am a huge fan. Like I mentioned before, I often write about video essays for filmschoolrejects.com, also known as One Perfect Shot on Twitter. And as I said to Philip during our interview, which has already been recorded and was really fantastic, I said, it seemed like every time I picked a subject to write about at Film School Rejects, you had made a video essay about it. Now, Philip worked for several years as a video essayist at Fandor, rest in peace, and has also had his videographic work published at Mubi. It's been screened at multiple film festivals, and he is also an experimental filmmaker himself. And that is our segue to homework, because what we will be talking about is a film that Philip made called Abandoned Movie. Now, what's interesting about Abandoned Movie is it may not be a video essay. And that is all that I'm going to say now, other than what Abandoned Movie essentially is a remix that Philip made of a documentary that he also made. And that is all that I want to say now. That is, trust me, that is an oversimplification by design, because what I want you to do now is go to thevideoessay.com and watch Abandoned Movie. Now, Philip has kindly agreed to make both of these videos public. This is kind of the soft launch of both of those films, so I'm very excited that Philip chose to do that on this podcast. And the reason for that is because Abandoned Movie is currently being submitted to festivals. But what Philip did when he sent me these films was he only sent me Abandoned Movie first, and then once I had watched it and began asking him questions about it in messages prior to our conversation, only then did he send me Abandoned the documentary and sort of explain the remix nature of Abandoned Movie. And that was by design, and after Philip and I talked, we decided that we would encourage all of you to please watch Abandoned Movie, which is the remix, before you watch Abandoned the documentary. I'm sure this sounds confusing, but once you go to our website, I promise it will all be clear to you. And these films, Abandoned Movie runs a little under an hour, I think right around 45 minutes, and Abandoned the documentary is about a half hour or so. So please do set aside a chunk of time, but I promise, they are worth it. And I think it's especially important that you watch them for next week's conversation, because as we get into whether these are video essays, whether they're essay films, whether they're experimental documentaries, maybe all three, having a good sense of what these films are will be incredibly important. The video essay that Philip selected for the two of us to talk about that was made by someone else is a truly stunning video essay called Peripheral Attention by Victoria Oliver-Farner. And all I will say about this video essay is that if you are a fan of Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation, this video essay will completely change the way you view that film, and it will also really challenge the way that you watch movies themselves. It's a truly stunning work, and I'm super happy that Philip selected it. I'd never seen it before Philip sent it to me, and we had a really interesting conversation about it. So both of those videos, actually I guess all three of those videos, will be available on thevideoessay.com, and that is your homework, and you have 2 weeks to do it until August 15th, so really no excuses. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day. Until next time, peace out.